all this. Mark Weisbrot, Research Co-Director, Center for Economic Policy, joins me here. And this is a mess of what's happening in Venezuela. How are they going to get themselves out of it?
Well, I think they can. You know, they actually have. If you look at all their reserves and what the government can sell, assets they can sell for cash, they've got about $70 billion in reserves and assets. And so that's enough to cover, you know, more than a year and a half of imports. So they can manage the transition to a lower price of oil. They've already adjusted a lot. They've cut imports in 2 years. They cut imports by 33%. That's almost as much as Greece has done in 6 years of depression.
I mean, we can all adjust to having lower income, but there's a cost to that, right? You're going to give up output. You're going to give up productivity. You're going to give up the happiness of your people, so to speak. I mean, there's consequences to this.
Oh, I don't mean adjusting to lower income. I mean just having a lower level of imports. In other words, they don't have a real balance of payments crisis where they don't get enough revenue to pay for their imports. They have an artificial balance of payments crisis due to the exchange rate. But these sanctions from the U.S. are really an attempt to try and undermine and destabilize the government.
You're saying you don't like them.
Well, nobody in the whole hemisphere likes them. It's not just me. The community of Latin Americans and Caribbean nations, which is every country in this hemisphere except for the U.S. and Canada, condemned the sanctions immediately. They've condemned them. They condemned them in December, actually, before this round of sanctions. They'll have another condemnation. If you look at the statements from the presidents in the region, they're even more harsh. President Correa said this reminds us, he called it a joke in bad taste. He said it reminds us of the darkest days of our America when the United States invaded and installed dictatorship. It's very well hated. I would predict, actually, that Obama will have to back off under pressure like they did in April of 2013, when the United States was the only government in the entire world that refused to recognize the presidential election in Venezuela.
If they hate it like you say, so why does the White House do it?
Well, they're doing it because they think it's a way of delegitimizing. They think it's a step towards, you know, a threat to the government. Well, I mean, why do they have sanctions on Russia? How good has that worked? How intimidated is Putin by those sanctions? Not very much. He's got 85% approval as well. So they don't really learn. They have this mentality.
Who's they?
Our government. You know, they have kind of a mafia mentality where, you know, if we punish you and threaten you, you're going to do what we want.
But now I have to follow up with this. I mean, you have a right, of course, to say the U.S. government is wrong, but I don't hear a lot of people saying the Venezuelan government is doing a lot of things right.
Well, they're going
unless you want to defend them.
Well, I mean, I don't defend any government. I voted for Obama twice, and I'm not going to defend all the things that he does either. So, but if you want to look at it objectively, I mean, here in the U.S. and the international media, Western media generally, you don't even get an honest discussion of this at all. It's all, you know, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. It's all bad stuff about Venezuela every day. So if you want to look at it objectively, yeah, the reason this government has been elected, won 13 out of 14 elections and referenda in the last 15 years, is because the majority of people, even with the last 2 years of inflation and shortages, is still vastly better off than they were in 1998 before Chavez was elected. And you had 20 years of actual economic decline, that is negative growth, before the Chavez era. So yeah, there's still a lot of loyalty there because they have improved living standards. Now, if the current trends continue, you're going to have a serious problem.
So what now? I mean, the lack of the food shortages. I mean, there are a lot of issues. None of them are a crisis, perhaps. But I want to get your view on how do these problems get resolved and what ultimately is in store for the future of Venezuela for the economy.
Well, I think they can resolve them. As I said, I think the problem is mostly the dysfunctional exchange rate system. You have the vast majority of the dollars that the government gets are given away way too cheaply. 6.3 bolivares fuertes per dollar, 12 is most of them, then another chunk at 12. These are unrealistic exchange rates. They're not sustainable, and the government eventually is going to fix that. And when they do, then they'll be able to bring down inflation and reduce the shortages, because it's all related to the exchange rate system. There is some sabotage too from the U.S., and I think these sanctions are just another form of that, to try and create more uncertainty and hostility and delegitimization. But I think when they fix this exchange rate system, they'll be able to fix the other things. This has only been about 2 years where they've had these problems.
Well, there's definitely some work to be done, especially between relations between the U.S. and Venezuela. Mark, giving us a little different side of the story. Thank you very much.